The alpha declared his mistress's child the heir. By morning, the Luna had taken her secret and vanished, a true life-inspired story. She had been ironing that same shirt for 11 minutes, not because it needed 11 minutes. It was a plain white dress shirt, the kind that had no complicated pleats or delicate collarbones that required attention. She knew how to iron. She had been ironing since she was 9 years old, standing on a stool in her grandmother's kitchen in Enugu while the radio played something slow and the late afternoon light came in sideways through a torn curtain. She knew how to iron, but the iron kept moving, back and forth, and her mind kept doing the same thing, going over the same stretch of last night, back and forth, like if she passed over it enough times something would smooth out. Nothing smoothed out. Outside, the pack house was alive the way it always was on a Sunday morning. Feet on floorboards, voices in corridors, somebody's child running in circles around the courtyard below, shrieking the high-pitched shriek of a child who has no idea that the world can make sounds much worse than joy. She could hear the kitchen staff starting breakfast. The smell of fried plantain came up through the window and wrapped itself around her, warm and familiar, like a hand on the shoulder from someone who didn't know they were being cruel. Her name was Jaise Okonkwo. She had been Luna of the Ironwood Pack for 7 years, 3 months, and she had stopped counting the days around year 4, which was probably its own kind of answer. She set the iron down. The shirt was still there. The crease she'd made on the left sleeve was slightly off-center. She stared at it for a moment. Then she folded the shirt and placed it back in her husband's wardrobe, because that was what she did. That was what she had always done. She kept his things neat. She kept the house running. She kept the peace at the table during pack dinners when 2 of the elder wolves started going at each other about territorial boundaries or grazing rights or whatever old argument they had pulled out of storage that week. She kept everything. She just didn't know what she was keeping it for anymore. There is a particular kind of woman that the world mislabels as strong. She is not strong, or she is, but not in the way people mean it. Not the unbothered kind, not the woman who needs nothing kind. She is strong the way a load-bearing wall is strong. Nobody notices it. Nobody says, "What a beautiful wall." They just keep putting things on it. They just keep leaning. Jaise had been load-bearing since she was 19. She had married Chukwuemeka Okonkwo, Emeka, the Alpha, when she was 23. He was 28, and already substantial in the way that certain men are, men who seem to occupy more space than their actual body requires, as if their authority generates its own atmosphere. He was not unkind at first. That is important to say. He was not unkind. He was just the kind of man who had never been trained to notice the things that didn't ask to be noticed. Jaise never asked. She learned his schedule and arranged her life around its edges. She learned which elders respected silence and which ones needed to be flattered with attention. She learned that the pack's youngest Omega female cried on the anniversary of her mother's death every year, and Jaise made sure to come by that morning with chai and a reason to stay for an hour. She learned all of it. She built a whole architecture of knowing, and nobody catalogued the architect. Their marriage was, by all observable metrics, respectable. They sat at the head of the table together. They made decisions together. Or rather, he made them and she refined them, smoothed the rough edges before they cut anyone. They did not fight in front of people. They did not embarrass each other. They also did not reach for each other in the dark anymore. That had stopped. She could not identify the exact date, the way you cannot identify the exact day you stopped being young. It just became the new fact of the room, the distance between their bodies at night, the way 2 rivers that once ran close can silently redirect themselves, rerouting without announcement, and by the time anyone notices they are simply going separate ways. She had a secret. This is the thing that nobody knew. Not the elders, not her husband, not even Ngozi, her closest friend in the pack, who was the type of woman who collected other people's truths the way some people collect ceramic figures, lovingly, reverently, with a space already cleared on the shelf. Not even Ngozi. The secret had a name. The secret was 7 years old and lived with Jaise's younger sister in Abuja, in a house with a mango tree in the front yard, and a dog named Biscuit, who was terrified of thunder. The secret had his father's mouth, and Adiase's habit of going very still when he was thinking hard about something. He held his pencil wrong. Adiase kept meaning to fix it. She visited twice a month. She told Emeka she was going to see her sister, which was true. She told him she would be gone 2 nights, which was true. She told him nothing else, which was not a lie, so much as a shape she'd built around the truth to keep it safe. The way you build a fence not to trap something, but to keep the wrong hands out. Her son's name was Tobena. He was 7 years old, and he did not know his father, and his father did not know he existed, and Adiase had made this decision alone, in a hospital room in Abuja, at 2 in the morning, holding a person who had just arrived in the world, thinking, not here, not like this, not yet. She was still thinking not yet. She had been thinking it for 7 years. Ifeoma was beautiful in the particular way that made women want to be generous about it. She was not cruel, as far as Adiase could observe. She was not scheming, not in any dramatic sense. She was simply a woman who had fallen into a thing with a powerful man and had neither the will nor the reason to pull herself out. The pack whispered about it. Packs always whisper. It is what they do in the spaces between the things that are said out loud. Adiase had learned to hear the whispers the way you learn to hear the hum of electricity in the walls. It is always there. You just tune it out until you need to know what the wiring is doing. She had never confronted Emeka about it. This was the part people would not understand, the part that would read wrong in the telling. They would say, why didn't she fight? And the answer was not that she lacked the courage. The answer was that she had done the calculation, the one where you add up what you have, and what you stand to lose, and what you are protecting, and fighting, at that particular time, for that particular thing, would have cost more than it returned. She was protecting Tobena. Everything she did in the shape of that. There were nights she lay awake and ran through the alternative version of her life, the one where she had told Emeka about Tobena when she found out she was pregnant, 3 months before she was officially Luna, 2 weeks before the mating ceremony. She would play it out in detail sometimes. She could picture exactly how that conversation would have gone. She knew Emeka. She knew the particular kind of man he was. Not wicked, not deliberately cruel, but constituted in such a way that things presented to him became things he had to manage, control, shape, to fit his own sense of what should be. A child presented to Emeka was a child that became a piece of his authority. A child kept from Emeka was a child who belonged to himself. She had chosen the second thing, and she had never, in 7 years, decided she was wrong. What she had decided, in smaller moments and then in the larger reckoning of the night after the dinner, was that the decision had cost her something she had not fully priced. Not Tobena. Tobena was not a cost. He was the whole point. But herself. The version of herself that might have existed had she not spent 7 years making her life small enough to fit inside a secret. She was 33 years old. She had spent the decade of her 20s building something that had someone else's name on it. She thought about this with the particular clarity that comes at 3:40 in the morning when the pack is asleep and the letter is written and the bag is packed and the only thing left is the walk to the car. She had built something. That was real. The programs were real. The relationships were real. The trust she had earned from women like Mama Chidinma and Old Dyke and the pack's younger members was real. You could not take that back by leaving. It would keep running. She had made sure of it. What she was leaving was the position, the title, the performance of being the alpha's wife, the careful agreement of it, the management of it, the infinite maintenance of a role that had long since stopped meaning anything to the man she was playing it alongside. She had spent 7 years being gracious. Gracious had run its course. The dinner was an annual thing. The Ironwood Pack's founding celebration, a name so solemn and self-important that Adiase had mentally shortened it to the dinner for years now. the same way you shorten a long official name into something you can carry without your arm going numb. She wore a dark green dress. She had her hair done by Chisholm, the pack's unofficial stylist, who worked out of her living room and always burned incense that smelled like church. The dress had a quiet kind of elegance to it, nothing that asked for applause. Jaise had long since stopped dressing to be noticed. She dressed the way she built everything, to last, to function, to do its job without complaint. She sat at the head table. On her left, Elder Dyke, who was 71 and smelled of tobacco, and was the only elder she genuinely liked, because he was the only one who had ever said thank you to her without someone watching. On her right, an empty seat that Emeka would take when he finished working the room, moving from table to table with the easy authority of a man who had never once walked into a room uncertain of his welcome. She drank her water. She made conversation with Deke about his garden. He had recently transplanted some tomatoes that were giving him trouble. She asked follow-up questions. She was genuinely interested. This was the part people got wrong about her, assuming her warmth was performance. She actually liked tomatoes. She actually liked old Dyke. She actually liked most of these people, this pack, this messy, loud collective that she had spent 7 years quietly holding together with both hands. Emeka took his seat. He smelled like cologne and wine and something else, something recent and warm that Jaise registered in her chest, the way you register a wrong note in a song you have heard 100 times. She did not look at him for a moment. She took a very slow sip of water and said something to Dyke about whether drip irrigation might help the tomatoes. Then Emeka stood. He clinked his glass. He was a good public speaker, Emeka. Even now, Jaise could admit this without bitterness. He knew how to build a room, how to hold attention without forcing it, how to make each person feel like the speech was aimed at them specifically. He talked about the pack, the year they'd had, the strength they'd built, the future ahead. She knew something was coming. She did not know what shape it would take. She found out 43 seconds later. He said Ifeoma's name. He said it the way you say a word you have been practicing, carefully, but with the small ease of practice underneath. He said it, and the room shifted, the way the air shifts before a storm, that particular weight settling in from nowhere. He spoke about a child. He spoke about blood. He spoke about lineage and continuation, and the responsibility of an alpha to ensure the future of his pack. He declared Ifeoma's child, a boy, 4 years old, named Chidi, as heir to the Ironwood pack. The room was very quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then it erupted in whatever the pack version of applause sounds like when half the people clapping don't know what else to do with their hands. Jaise set her fork down on a slightly different spot on the tablecloth. She rearranged her water glass. She thought about Tobena's pencil grip. The way he held it too far down, too close to the nib, so his fingers were always smudged with graphite by the time he was done writing anything. She kept meaning to correct it. She thought about whether her sister had remembered to put his school bag by the door this morning. She thought about whether Biscuit had recovered from last Tuesday's thunderstorm. She thought about the mango tree and whether it had started fruiting yet this season, because last year it had fruited early and Tobena had eaten so many that his stomach hurt and he'd been embarrassed about it. Sweet boy, embarrassed in the way children are when their own body surprises them. She was thinking about all of this. She was thinking about all of this because she had learned, a long time ago, that the mind will not hold things too large all at once. It finds the small things. The pencil grip, the mango, the dog. She applauded. Her palms came together at the exact right speed, the exact right force, the exact right number of times. If anyone was watching, and some of them were, she knew, with the particular attention of people waiting to see how a person will absorb a blow, they would have seen nothing on her face except the smooth, composed expression of a woman who was very good at being a Luna. This was, she had come to understand, her truest skill and her deepest trap. After dinner, 3 different women came to find her separately, to tell her in careful voices how wonderful she was, and how graceful, and how Emeka was lucky to have her. She thanked them. She meant it less than she showed, which was the first truly dishonest thing she did that night. Emeka did not come to their bedroom. This was not unusual. But she lay in the dark, and she performed the calculation, the one she had been putting off. She started at the beginning, year one, what she had brought, what she had built, what she had agreed to, and she worked her way forward, line by line. The way you audit something you have long suspected is not adding up. It did not add up. She got to the end, and she looked at the remainder, and she thought, so that's what it is. She got up. Not immediately. She lay there for another hour, long enough to be sure. The house settled around her. The pack slept. She listened to it breathe. Then she got up. The way you prepare for a thing you know, in your body, is eventually going to happen. The way your hands know to brace, before you lose your footing, before your brain has processed the fall. She had an account at a bank in Port Harcourt that Emeka had never asked about, which meant he had never known to look. Not because she had hidden it, she had simply never offered it, the way you do not offer information nobody asks for. Over 3 years, she had moved money into it in amounts small enough to feel like nothing and large enough to accumulate into something. She had a bag at the back of her wardrobe. Not packed. She was not the kind of woman who kept a packed bag. That would have been either melodrama or certainty, and she had been trying to hold neither. But there was a bag that had certain things in it. Documents. A copy of her international passport. The small envelope with her grandmother's gold earrings that she had kept in the same envelope for as long as she could remember. A notebook. 3 pens. She did not pack much more than that. She wrote a letter. It took her 40 minutes. She had drafts of it in her head. She had been drafting it for months without meaning to. The way you draft things you do not want to need. She wrote it by hand at the desk near the window, while the sky was still completely dark. 3:40 in the morning, the house silent, the courtyard empty, Emeka asleep somewhere down the hall. The letter was addressed to the elder council. 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph was a formal resignation of her title as Luna. It was correct in every procedural way. She had made herself learn the pack's governance documents over the years, in the manner of someone who reads the emergency instructions on an airplane, not with expectation, but with the understanding that one day the knowledge might matter. The second paragraph was a full document of the welfare programs she had built and run for 7 years. Names of staff, schedules, funding sources, contact numbers for the partner organizations she had brought in. Everything anyone would need to continue the work without her. This paragraph was the longest. She had not planned for it to be the longest, but her hands kept writing, kept filling in the details, kept making sure the work would survive her absence, because the work was never about her. The work was about the pack, and she still loved the pack. Even now, even at 3:40 in the morning, writing herself out of it. She was not leaving because she stopped loving. She was leaving because she finally started choosing. The third paragraph was 1 sentence. She wrote it, and then she sat back and read it back, and she did not change a single word. She folded the letter. She put it in an envelope and wrote the council's name on the front, and she left it on the table in the main meeting room, the long table where every significant pack decision had been made for the last 7 years. The table she had polished herself more than once, because it was easier to do it yourself than to explain to someone else how. She walked out of the pack house at 4:07 in the morning. The night security guard at the east gate was a young man called Femi, who had worked that shift for 4 years, and who, in 4 years, had never once had a reason to question Jaise Okonkwo. She had brought him chin-chin at Christmas. She had written the reference letter that got his younger brother into the PAC's apprenticeship program. She had asked after his mother's knee surgery and actually listened to the answer. He waved her through. She did not tell him goodbye. She did not tell him anything. She nodded the way she always nodded, the same nod she had given him 100 times before. And she walked through the gate, and she did not look back. This was important. She had thought about whether she would look back, and she had decided she would not because she was trying to perform strength, but because she understood that looking back is a door, and she could not afford any more doors. She drove 3 hours and 20 minutes. The road was straight for long stretches, the kind of straight that makes you feel you are not moving, but the world is moving instead, sliding toward you while you stay still. She did not play music. She drove in silence, which is the opposite of loneliness. Silence you choose is a different country from silence that is imposed. She stopped once for petrol. The attendant was a teenage boy whose eyes slid past her face without catching. She was grateful in a way she could not have explained to anyone. She pulled onto her sister's street as the sky was beginning to decide it was morning. Not morning yet, but considering it, the dark going soft and imprecise at the edges. Her sister Neka opened the door before she knocked. Some things, between sisters, do not need announcement. They stood in the doorway for a moment, and Neka looked at her face, really looked at it, the way she had been looking at Adaise's face since they were children, and Adaise had learned that the safest expression was no expression. Neka looked, and Adaise looked back, and nothing was said in those first few seconds that needed words. Then Neka stepped aside and let her in. She went to Tobena's room. He was asleep. Of course he was asleep. It was nearly 7 in the morning, and he was 7 years old, and the world, as far as he was concerned, began when he opened his eyes and ended when he closed them, which is the exact right size for the world to be when you are 7. She sat on the edge of his bed. She did not wake him. She just sat there, still wearing her coat, her bag on the floor beside her feet, and she watched him breathe. His mouth was open slightly. His arm was thrown over his face the way he always slept, blocking the light from a window that was still dark, blocking light that hadn't even arrived yet. Her practical boy, prepared for the sun before it comes. Something in her chest, something that had been clenched since the dinner, since Emeka stood up and clinked that glass, since she had rearranged her water glass and thought about pencil grips, opened 1 fraction of an inch. Not relief. Before relief. The thing before relief that is simply still here, still intact. This, at least, still the right shape. She sat there until Tobena stirred, until he pushed his arm off his face, and blinked at the room, and found her sitting on his bed in the early morning, with her coat on, and he said, with the magnificent unfazed practicality of a 7-year-old who has grown up knowing his mother appears and disappears on a schedule that is outside his understanding, "Mummy, is it Saturday?" "Not yet," she said. "Go back to sleep." He did, just like that, head back down, arm back over his face, asleep in 40 seconds. She watched him. Outside, the birds started. That particular first light conversation that birds have, tentative at first, then building, then full. She listened to it. She thought, I am going to be here for the next one, and the one after. It was the first thought she had had in 7 years that was about forward instead of alongside. The pack house woke up at its usual time. The kitchen staff made breakfast. The smell of akara and pap moved through the corridors. The youngest children appeared in the courtyard with the immediate physical urgency of small people who have been asleep for 10 hours and now require action. The older wolves took their morning walk along the east boundary the way they always did, the route so familiar their feet knew it without instruction. It was Mama Chidinma, the head of household staff, who found the letter. She was setting the meeting room for the morning briefing, laying out the notepads, checking the water pitchers, straightening the chairs, and the envelope was simply there on the table, placed in the exact center, which was itself a message, because Adaeze Okonkwo did not place things without intention. Mama Chidinma picked it up and read the name on the front. She set it back down. She went to find Elder Dyke, because she had been working in this house for 9 years, and she had learned which problems went to which people, and this one, by weight alone, by the particular quality of its presence on the table, went to Dyke. Dyke read it standing up. He read it twice. Then he sat down in the chair at the head of the table, not his chair, Emeka's chair, and he sat there with the letter in his hands for a long time. Long enough that Mama Chidinma, standing in the doorway, began to understand that whatever was in the letter was the size of the thing she had suspected it was. "Wake the Alpha," Dyke said. Emeka read the letter in the kitchen. He was still in his morning clothes, loose trousers, a plain t-shirt, the casual ease of a man who had not yet had to be the alpha today. He read the first paragraph, and his face went the specific blank of a person encountering a thing their mind does not immediately have a box for. He read the second paragraph, and the blank became something else, something tighter, around the eyes. He got to the third paragraph. He read the one sentence. He looked up from the letter. He called her phone. He called it 6 times. The 7th time, it went straight to voicemail, which meant it had been turned off, or the battery had died, or, and this was the thought that moved through him the way cold water moves, slowly, and then all at once. She had taken out the SIM card. He stood in the kitchen holding his phone, and he thought about where she would go. Her parents were gone. Her father 3 years ago, her mother the year before they married. He thought about her sister, Nneka, Abuja, and he realized in the particular humiliating way that comes on slowly that he did not know Nneka's married name. He had met her 4, maybe 5 times. He had never had cause to call her. He had never had cause because a jaise had always been there. He began to make a list in his head of what he knew about his wife's life outside this house, the people in it, the places she went, and the list was shorter than he expected, much shorter, the kind of short that takes on a meaning when you look at it, the way the absence of something can be its own kind of evidence. He knew she visited her sister twice a month. He knew she drove herself and came back 2 nights later. He knew which route she took, the longer one she always said, because the shorter one had a stretch of bad road. He did not know the address. He stood in his kitchen in his morning clothes and he did not know his wife's sister's address. He was not a man who was used to sitting with things. This was the truth of him, the part that nobody said at packed dinners but everybody knew the shape of. He was built for action, for resolution, for the satisfying closing of a matter. When a problem arrived, he solved it. When a conflict arose, he settled it. He moved through the world the way a large stone moves through water, decisively, displacing whatever was in the way, settling where he settled, and that was where he was. The letter was not a problem he could settle. The sentence was not a conflict he could resolve by showing up and being the alpha. He kept returning to it. She had walked out of the east gate at 4 in the morning, and the guard had waved her through, not because she had a plan and Femi hadn't noticed, but because in 4 years of knowing her, Femi had never had a reason to question her. She had built that. She had built the trust at the gate, the relationships in every corridor, the institutional memory that made this house function. She had built all of it, while he was busy being the alpha. He sat in his chair, and he thought about what it meant that she had prepared a document, a full operational document, before she left. The staff names, the schedules, the funding contacts. She had not written that document in one night. That document was written over time, in pieces, quietly, the way you build something you know you will eventually need to leave behind. She had known she was going to leave. He did not know when she had known, but she had known. And she had spent that knowing time making sure the pack would be fine without her, making sure the work would continue, making sure nobody who depended on her programs would be dropped. He sat with this for a long time. His own departure plan, in the equivalent scenario, would have looked nothing like that. He was honest enough with himself to know this. He would have been reactive, not prepared. He would have been loud where she was quiet, and careless where she was exact. In the corridor outside the meeting room, the pack moved through its late afternoon. Somebody was arguing in a low, insistent voice about something trivial, a borrowed tool, a shift schedule, the kind of small friction that packs generate constantly as a way of managing bigger pressures. He could hear the argument, and it should have required his attention, and he could not make himself care about it. He thought about the word heir. He had stood up at that table and said it with such confidence, such certainty. He had practiced the speech and practiced it, and when he delivered it, he had felt the particular relief of a thing decided, of having stopped carrying the decision inside himself and put it down on the table for everyone to see. And then Jaise had rearranged her water glass. He had been watching her when she did it, not because he was looking for her reaction. He had told himself he didn't need to watch her reaction, but his eyes had moved there automatically, the way eyes move toward familiar things in unfamiliar situations. And he had seen her hand come down and set the glass in a slightly different position, and that was it. No expression, no flinch, just the glass moved 2 centimeters. He had told himself that meant she was fine. Now he understood it meant something different. Now he understood that a woman who responds to the public dismantling of her position by moving a water glass 2 centimeters is a woman who has been managing her reactions for so long that the management is its own second language. She is not fine. She is composed. These are not the same country. He had not known the difference. That was the part he kept arriving at. Not that she had left. He was beginning, slowly, to understand why she had left, but that he had not known the difference between a woman who was fine and a woman who was managing at a level he had never thought to look for. He had not looked. He had not needed to look, because she was always there, and things that are always there do not ask to be looked at. The argument in the corridor resolved. Footsteps. A door. Silence. The 3rd paragraph of the letter began to move through the pack, the way things move through packs, not with feet but with mouths, passed from one person to the next, gaining small distortions, and then being corrected, and then gaining new ones, until by afternoon it had taken on the quality of something larger than a sentence. It was just one sentence. There is an heir already. The alpha simply chose not to look. 11 words. No name attached. No elaboration. No claim. Just the sentence, sitting there in the middle of the letter, like a stone dropped into water, and around it, the ripples spreading. The elder council read it with the careful attention of people who understood that in certain situations, what is not said is a louder statement than what is. They read it, and they looked at each other across the long table, Dyke's table, Jaise's table, the table she had polished herself, and nobody spoke for a moment. Then the questions began. Does she mean a biological child, a legal arrangement, an adoption she had arranged without telling anyone? Was it a claim? Was it a threat? Was it simply the statement of a woman who had been publicly replaced and was choosing the largest available response? No one knew. Ifeoma heard it by early afternoon. Someone told her. She never found out who, which was its own particular thing to carry. She read the sentence, and she went quiet for a long time, and in the quiet, she was doing the arithmetic that Jaise had done the night before. The arithmetic of all the days, and what they added up to, except from a different starting position. The sentence gave her less certainty than she had expected to have by now. Emeka heard the sentence from Dyke, who read it back to him from the letter, which Emeka had technically already read, but which now, in the full light of day, in a house that was missing its Luna, landed differently. He had not considered the possibility that she had something he didn't know about. Not because he was naive, because he had not paid attention, because Jaise had been so consistent in her presence, so reliable in her management of this house and this pack, that she had become, he was only now seeing this, invisible in the particular way of things that are always there. The wall that is always solid stops being noticed. It becomes the room. He had not noticed the wall. Now the wall was gone, and the room was making no sense without it. He spent the afternoon looking for her through every channel available to him. Pack connections in other territories, friends of friends, anyone who might know where the Luna had gone. Every inquiry came back with nothing, or with the polite version of nothing, which is, we will let you know if we hear anything. By evening, he had not found her. He sat in the meeting room alone. The room was cool and quiet. The letter was still on the table. He had been picking it up and putting it down all day, the way you touch a wound, not to examine it but because your hand keeps going there, because the brain is still processing the fact of it. He read the sentence again. There is an heir already. The alpha simply chose not to look. He thought about the word already. Already means before. Already means something that predates this moment. Already means she is not making a threat about the future. She is stating a fact about the past. A past that has been running alongside his own without his knowledge. He thought about her sister visits. Twice a month. 2 nights. 7 years. He did the arithmetic. He sat with the answer. Outside, the pack moved through its evening. Dinner, low conversation, the children being called in. All the ordinary machinery of a life that continues, regardless of the extraordinary things that happen inside it. The pack ate. The children were washed and put to bed. The kitchen was cleaned. Somewhere, Femi was walking the east gate boundary, the same route as always. Emeka sat alone with the letter and the sentence and the arithmetic. He came into the kitchen in his pajamas, which had trains on them. He had had a phase about trains that had lasted 14 months and shown no signs of ending, and he found his mother at the table with a cup of tea she hadn't drunk yet, and his aunt Neka making eggs at the stove. He looked at the tableau of his mother at the table in the morning, and he said, "Is it a school day?" "Yes," Adaeze said. "Are you staying?" She looked at him. He looked back. He was 7, and he had learned early, in the way of children who love people who sometimes disappear, to ask the direct question. "For a while," she said. "Yes." He processed this. It was a different answer than usual. Usually the answer was, "I have to go back on Monday." Usually, there was an end date built into the visit. He could tell from the weight of "for a while" that there was no Monday built into it this time. He climbed into the chair across from her. He put his elbows on the table. Neka made a noise from the stove. He moved his elbows off the table. He picked up a spoon and looked at his reflection in it. "Can we get another dog?" he said. Adaeze opened her mouth. "Biscuit gets lonely," he said, preemptively, before she could form the no. "I can see it on his face. He does the sad thing with his ears. I don't think that's... His ears go like this." He demonstrated the ears with his hands. Nikeka started laughing at the stove. Adaeze looked at her son, who was doing his best sad dog ear impression at 7:30 in the morning, completely unaware that his mother had walked out of her entire life 8 hours ago, completely unaware that the world that contained him had just reorganized itself around a single decision made at a desk in the dark. He was asking about a dog. He was doing ear impressions. She thought, yes. Not to the dog. She hadn't decided about the dog yet. To this. To being here for this. To sitting across from her son at a table and having a conversation about a dog's emotional state while the eggs were cooking and the morning was arriving in full and the tea was still warm. She thought yes to all of it. "We will talk about the dog," she said. He took this as a victory. She could see him decide to take it as a victory. He put his elbows back on the table. He got the look again from Neka. He removed them. Adaeze drank her tea. Outside, the mango tree was full. She could see it through the kitchen window, heavy with fruit, the branches bowed under the weight. A good season this year. Tobena would eat too many again and feel embarrassed about his stomach again, and she would be here to see it. She wrapped both hands around her cup. The tea was warm. The kitchen smelled like eggs and something green. Neka had started growing herbs in small pots on the windowsill, basil and scent leaves and something she called her experimental one that nobody could identify. The morning was fully morning now, unambiguous, the kind of light that asks you to be present in it. Adaeze was present in it. Her sister had never asked why. This was the thing about Neka that Adaeze had relied on, quietly and gratefully, for the whole 7 years. Neka was 30 years old and a secondary school biology teacher and was raising Tobena alongside her own daughter, Adaeze's niece Chisom, who was 9 and had the focused energy of a child who intends to be a scientist and is already laying the groundwork. Neka had her own life, a full, complicated, busy life with a husband who worked night shifts at a hospital and 2 children and a house that was always a little in need of something. She had made room in it for Adaeze's secret without being asked. The way she had done it was simply by not making it strange. From the beginning, From the night Jaise had called her from a hospital in Abuja at 2 in the morning and said, "I need you to come," Nneka had come. And when the scope of what she was being asked became clear, she had looked at her sister and said, "Okay, the way you say okay when a calculation is simple, when the person asking is the person who matters, when what is being asked is within your power to give." She had said okay, and she had meant it for 7 years. The morning after Jaise arrived, Nneka made jollof rice for dinner, because Tobenna's answer to the question of what he wanted for dinner was always jollof rice, and because she understood, without it being said, that her sister needed something familiar and ordinary and warm. Tobenna ate with the intensity of someone who has not been distracted by thought during a meal since the age of 3. Chisum lectured everyone about the migratory patterns of the lesser kestrel, which she had been studying in school, and which, according to her, was one of the most underappreciated birds in the world. Jaise listened to the lesser kestrel lecture. She asked questions. She learned more about the lesser kestrel than she had anticipated needing to know. Chisum's face, when you asked follow-up questions about the lesser kestrel, was the face of someone discovering that the world is better than they thought. After the children were in bed, she and Nneka sat on the back step with tea. The yard was dark, Biscuit's slow breathing audible from somewhere in the grass where he had settled. "You're staying," Nneka said. It wasn't a question. Yes. Good. That was it. That was the whole conversation about it. Nneka refilled the tea, and they sat in the dark, and Biscuit snored, and the night was warm and quiet. And Jaise thought about how the world can run 2 different stories simultaneously. The version in which everything is collapsing, and the version in which someone is refilling your teacup, and both are true at the same time, which is one of the things about being alive that takes the longest to understand. The welfare program she had left behind did not fall apart. This was important to her, and it surprised people that it was. They expected her to be focused on the rupture, on Emeka, on the question of what would happen now. But Jaise had spent 3 hours of her 40-minute letter on that second paragraph, and it showed. The staff knew what to do. The schedules were clear. The funding contacts had numbers attached to them, and those numbers had names, and those names had context. By Wednesday, Elder Dyke had convened a small group to oversee the transition. He told Mama Chidinma privately, expecting something like this for longer than he would say out loud. She was too careful not to know what she was preparing, he said. Mama Chidinma said nothing. She refilled his tea and thought about the years of small things, the careful systems, the documented procedures, the way Jaise had trained people, as if she were always thinking about what happened when she wasn't there. The pack adjusted. Packs do. They are by nature built for continuity. They know how to close around a gap, how to redistribute weight. It takes time, and it is painful in the specific way of all losses that come with the recognition that you did not know what you had, but it happens. It happened. The question of the letter's 3rd paragraph did not resolve. Emeka made quiet inquiries in the 2nd week. He was careful about them. He was, whatever else he was, not a stupid man, and he understood that the wrong kind of inquiry would become its own kind of answer. He asked obliquely. He asked through channels. He got nothing definitive back. He thought about going to Abuja himself. He thought about showing up at Nneka's house, except he didn't know the address, and he was not willing to make the fact of not knowing public, because the fact of not knowing was a thing he was still sitting with, the way you sit with an injury before you decide what to do about it. He did not go. He would later not be sure if this was restraint or cowardice or both. He sat with this question too. In Abuja, Jaise enrolled Tobenna in the school 2 streets from Nneka's house. She walked him there on the first morning. His bag was too big for him. It was the right size for his age, but he was on the smaller side, like her, and it gave him the particular silhouette of a child carrying the weight of an adventure they are very committed to. She stood at the school gate and watched him walk through it. He turned back once. He gave her a thumbs up, which was not a gesture she had taught him, and which she suspected he had gotten from a cartoon. She gave him one back. He turned around and walked into school. She stood at the gate for another minute. The morning around her was ordinary. Other parents leaving, the sound of children inside the compound, a teacher calling out something she couldn't make out, a chicken that had somehow gotten onto the school premises and was being shooed toward the gate by a very determined groundskeeper. She watched the chicken. It ran in the wrong direction. The groundskeeper adjusted his angle. The chicken adjusted its angle. They did a brief, complicated negotiation before the chicken made a decision and went through the gate with a dignity that was impressive for a chicken. Jaise laughed. Not a small, polite laugh. A real one. The kind that surprises you by coming from further down in your body than you expected. She laughed at the chicken, and the groundskeeper, and the whole small, absurd, ordinary scene, and when it was done, she felt lighter by exactly that amount, the weight of one real laugh. She walked home. She did not rush into the next thing. This surprised her, actually. She had assumed she would feel urgency, some pressure to reconstruct, to build a new version of herself quickly, to justify the departure with immediate visible progress. That was how she had always operated. Something comes down, you build something up. The replacement of one structure with another. Forward, forward, always in motion. Instead, she was slow. She woke up in the morning and made tea. She walked Tobena to school. She came home and sat with Neka and talked about nothing important. The herbs on the windowsill, the neighbor's renovation that was taking 3 months longer than quoted, whether Biscuit was actually lonely or whether Tobena was projecting, which was a possibility because Tobena was a tender-hearted child who assumed other living things felt exactly what he felt. She read. She had not read for herself, not for the pleasure of it, not following her own interest, in years. She went to the small bookshop near the school and stood in it for 40 minutes and bought 4 books, and then felt guilty about the 40 minutes until she realized there was no reason to feel guilty, and then felt the unfamiliarity of that realization, which was its own kind of information. Slowly she began to know what she wanted. Not in dramatic terms, not in the form of a vision or a calling or a decisive new direction. It came in small, specific forms. She wanted to be the one to take Tobena to school every day, not twice a month. She wanted to know which teacher he liked, and which one he found confusing, and what his reading group was working on. She wanted to be there when Chisholm explained something about the lesser kestrel, or whatever bird was next, wanted to see that face again. She wanted to put her name on things she built. This was the one that took her longest to name. It had been so long since she had put her name on anything. The welfare programs, the systems, the relationships, all of it attributed to the pack, to the position, to the Luna, which was a title and not a name. She had built things and they had belonged to Ironwood. She had given everything to an entity that could not hold it back. She wanted to build something that, if she looked at it, showed her own shape. She did not know yet what that would be, but she was thinking about it, slowly, the way you think about something you are finally allowed to think about. In the evenings, while Tobena was doing homework, and Chisholm was categorizing birds, and Neka's husband was asleep after his night shift, she sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and she wrote things down. Not plans, not yet, just things she knew, things she was good at. The particular kinds of knowledge she had accumulated over 7 years of running a pack's welfare infrastructure. She had more expertise than she had realized. She wrote that down too. Nobody ever confirmed or denied the claim. This is what became, over time, the strange center of the story. Not its resolution, but its irresolution. Emeka could not prove there was a child because he could not find one. Jaise never offered proof because she never spoke to anyone in the pack again, not publicly, not through official channels. The sentence just sat there. There is an heir already. The alpha simply chose not to look. In some packs, this kind of thing gets resolved quickly. Declarations, blood tests, formal hearings. In the Ironwood pack, in that particular year, with those particular dynamics, it became the thing that nobody could quite close. A door left open, a question with a living answer that had declined to announce itself. Was there a child? Was she bluffing? Was this a grief-shaped weapon she had built in a letter at 3:40 in the morning and left for a man to carry? The elders discussed it. Dyke thought she had a child. He could not have told you why he was certain, but he was. He had sat across from Adazio Okonkwo for 7 years at that long table, and there was something in the quality of her patience, The way it was structured, load-bearing, pointed at something he couldn't see, that had always made him feel she was protecting something. The other elders were less sure. Ifeoma was not sure either, and the not knowing had become a texture in her life that she had not anticipated. She had expected, after the announcement, that things would simplify, that the path would be clearer. Instead, there was the letter, and the sentence, and the open door, and the specific uncomfortable awareness that the woman who had been the Luna for 7 years had exited without drama, without confrontation, without even a raised voice, and had still, in 11 words, made everything more complicated. This is a particular kind of power. The kind that is very quiet and then, at the precise moment of departure, is suddenly not. The pack, in the months that followed, did something unexpected. It talked about her. Not in the way it had talked about the letter or the sentence, that had been urgent, dramatic, the kind of talking that is really a form of processing shock. This talking came later and was different in quality, quieter. The way you talk about something when the urgency has passed, and what remains is the truth of it. Mama Chidinma talked about her to the new welfare coordinator who came in January. She talked about the documentation, yes, the extraordinary clarity of the handover, but also about the specific small things, the way Adeze had learned the name of every child in the pack's school-age group and could tell you not just their name but something about them, something real, something she had noticed. The way she had insisted that the pack's most isolated members, the oldest widows, the unmated wolves who lived on the edges of the territory, received the same quality of attention as those at the center. She never let the edges fray, Mama Chidinma said. Most people, they look after the center and call it enough. She always went to the edges. Elder Dyke talked about her in a different register. He talked about the governance documents she had read. He talked about the fact that a woman in her position had not been required to understand the Elder Council's procedural rules, had not been expected to, and had quietly learned them anyway. She was preparing to leave correctly, he said, which was both a compliment and a kind of elegy. To leave correctly. To exit a situation with the same precision and care that you brought to entering it. Some of the younger female pack members talked about her in the way you talk about someone who did the thing you could not imagine doing. There was a 24-year-old named Adana, not Ifeoma, a different woman, a coincidence of name that the pack briefly found uncomfortable, who had been in a difficult situation of her own for 2 years, waiting for it to resolve, telling herself she was being patient. She heard about the letter, she read the sentence. She made her own calculation. Adeze never knew about this. She never knew about the conversations at the pack house, the things that her absence made possible by showing the shape of what she had been. The story of the woman who had left by morning spread, slowly, not as gossip, but as something closer to instruction. It got to people who needed to hear it in forms they could use. This is also what she built. She did not know it, but it was hers. There is a particular way that power works when it belongs to a person who never announced it. It spreads differently. It does not announce itself because it never had to. It was never that kind of thing. It was the kind of power built from showing up, from doing the invisible work, from learning the names of people nobody asked you to learn, from preparing for the exit with the same care you brought to the entrance, from writing 3 paragraphs at 3:40 in the morning, the last of which was 11 words, and knowing exactly which 11 words were the right ones. That kind of power does not require the person who has it to be present for it to keep working. It goes on, it moves through other people's stories. It shows up in the decisions other women make, in the calculations they perform at their own 3:40 in the mornings, in the letters they write and the gates they walk through, and the new mornings they walk into. Adeze did not know any of this was happening. She was at a kitchen table in Abuja, watching her son hold a pencil slightly wrong. On a Thursday morning in October, 8 months after the dinner, 8 months after the letter, 8 months after Femi waved her through the east gate, Tobena sat at the kitchen table and read a book about a boy who goes to live in a forest and makes friends with a family of hedgehogs. He was eating crackers while he read, one-handed, without looking at the crackers, the way Adeze had read at his age. the way her grandmother before her had read. His pencil was on the table beside him. He had been using it to underline words he didn't know. Her system, which she had introduced last month, and which he had adopted immediately, and which already had the dog-eared intensity of a habit that would follow him for years. She watched him read. She was making tea. The kettle was heating. The kitchen was warm. Outside, the mango tree was between seasons, the fruit gone now, the leaves full and dark and resting, building toward the next thing. He looked up from the book. "Mummy," he said, "what's a recluse?" She thought about it. Someone who keeps to themselves, someone who is happy not being around many people. He processed this. "Like a cat," he said. "Yes," she said, "exactly like a cat." He nodded and went back to his book. He underlined the word. The kettle boiled. She made her tea, and she stood at the window, and she looked at the tree, and the yard, and the morning, and she was thinking about nothing in particular, and everything in particular. The way your mind works when it has finally been given enough space to stretch out. She was not thinking about Emeka. She was not thinking about the letter. She was not thinking about the sentence, and who had read it, and what they were doing with it, whether it had resolved or was still open, what the pack was doing in its ongoing machine of continuation. She was thinking about whether hedgehogs actually lived in forests, because Tobena was going to ask her eventually, and she wanted to know the answer. She was thinking about the dog, the second dog, the one Tobena had been campaigning for, because Biscuit's ears really did do the sad thing. She was thinking about the school gate, and the chicken, and the thumbs up that she had not taught him. She was thinking about her grandmother's kitchen in Enugu, and the radio playing something slow, and the afternoon light through a torn curtain, and learning to iron a shirt so well that you never have to think about it. She wrapped her hands around her cup. The tea was exactly the right temperature. Tobena turned a page. Outside, the birds were doing what birds do in October, beginning to plan, beginning to gather, beginning the slow readjustment toward whatever comes next. She could hear them. She listened. She was here. End.